All right, I'm very happy today to be joined by Santiago Jaramillo, who's the CEO of Bunny Studios. Now, Bunny manages end-to-end creative services, from voiceovers to motion graphics, from audio ads to dubbing projects. They help companies scale their team's needs with a crowd of 15,000 plus creators and over 90 different languages. Welcome into the pod, Santiago.
Thank you, Paul, for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. All right. So, as you know, on this podcast, we try to look at remote and hybrid environments from a number of different angles. And so, I'm actually really excited to have you on today because, almost by definition, you've got thousands of creators that are working through Bunny Studios. So, that means, by definition, they're remote from not just from you, but from the organizations that are using their services. And I think that will give people a very interesting kind of different angle through which to look at this, where a lot of times people tend to think of remote workers as just being the full-time employees that they have inside their organization. Are they remote or are they in office? This is the much broader look of remote. So let's start with how Bunny Studios works as an organization. Your creators, I know you call it a platform, but ostensibly they're part of a marketplace. Is that right?
Correct. That's a bit of how they're organized.
So, what does that mean in terms of how they're distributed? How do the creators even become aware of you? And how are they effectively delivered to the customers?
Good. So there are about 15,000 people working in the company as creators. They're based in the US, the UK. You can go to South Africa. They're going to be in Singapore, Japan, in a lot of different countries. There's a lot of demographics that we address with a lot of different skill sets as well. And then what we do in the product to organize work is the platform where it actually intervenes. It's to organize the skill sets in an accessible way for the buyer.
Hmm.
So if you're going to be creating or potentially localizing your podcast into German, then the organization of the crowd is very important, and the skill sets that they come with are very important to organize as well. Think about content localization of a medical article or a lawyer of a law, yeah, concept. Some of those things you want to make sure that the skill sets are organized, and then the database organizes that skill sets, and then people can actually access through the demographics and through the skill sets what they're going to be buying. That would be the first part on how the crowd is organized.
Hmm.
The second part that you want to think about it is there's a lot of in-house and email-based solutions in terms of communication. One of the things that we pride ourselves at Bunny is that we do focus a lot on quality and we focus a lot on speed. Those are two areas that we heavily emphasize to our buyers what they're going to be getting at the end. And then the system is built to be a 24/7 open platform when anyone can buy from anyone. So in that 27 component, one of the things that you have to organize is the time zone of the crowd to make sure that whenever you're buying something at, I don't know, potentially in Seattle, you're going to be, and the creator is in Germany, again, using the same example, then the time difference is going to work for the expectation of the deliverable. And then you add a component of time zone that works into that production. But other than that, we have an internal communication tool to communicate how whenever there's a project to be created, whenever there's a deliverable sent to the client, and then old-fashioned email-based. It's an external tool. It's an external vendor for a lot of our buyers. So we use email for communication. And then to your third question, how are the assets delivered? We also manage an in-house tool, so companies can actually go to the platform, request what they're buying, but the creator can actually upload all of the assets to the platform, and the client is able to access them.
Hmm.
We organize them. Think about a Dropbox, think about a Google Drive. When we properly organize all of these assets, that can be in a project of one asset to thousands of assets, so the buyer can actually access the information very easily. And as you think of mirrors when you think about remote organization, one of the concepts that I'm sure you've discussed with other guests here on your own product, it's there's a lot of how do you access information?
Yeah.
How do you make sure that you find what you're actually looking to find? And that's one of the things that we do heavily on the production of the product. People can upload content in an organized way, and whomever is searching and buying can find this content in an easy way.
So that's very interesting. How long have you been? How long has Bunny been around?
We've been in business for 11 years and a half. So I've been running and being part of this company for a while now.
Very interesting. So I would imagine, because a lot of what you're talking about there is technology, organization, and basically kind of making sure that the data flows effectively within your organization in a
Mhm.
streamlined way. Have those been many of the innovations that you've had to create over the course of the last few years in order to be able to make sure that things run smoothly?
That's actually a good question, and it's not the typical question that I get when people listen about Bonnie Studio. But the reason I find it to be a good question is think about having 10,000 to 15,000 people. Think about having more than 100 different skill sets, and think about having more than 50 different demographics.
Yeah.
And organizing that and putting it together, that could be thought about a trivial problem of, well, you just put a search and then there's a request and there's a send and that's it. But there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes. The way that I actually explain what we ended up building over the last 10 years is think about of an Amazon warehouse
Hmm.
when you have a lot of products that are organized on a lot of different categories. And then when a request happens in Amazon, uh, the robots that are on the Amazon warehouse with a lot of human power support in the process go and pick up the product, go through the delivering process that it has to go, and actually end up on our houses on whatever we actually ended up buying. What we ended up doing was taking all of the skill sets from all the creators with all of the demographics and organizing them on an accessible warehouse where robots, so it's powered by technology, can actually access these skill sets whenever it's in need, making sure they're available, making sure they have the quality from whomever is buying something, and making sure it will be delivered in the specific time frame that the buyer is looking to get their asset. The technology access that sends you the product, and it happens in parallel not to one to 10, but we actually serve 6,000 customers on a yearly basis with very unique workflows. So the technology allows people to access a big crowd of talent, uh, create a lot of content without ever having quote unquote issues in the process of delivery. And then at the end, you get a voiceover extremely very fast delivered in 90 minutes, which is sometimes what we do. You get an animation that takes a couple of weeks or even a month in a couple of days, and you can dub or localize a lot of content that would take you months. You can do it in a couple of weeks. And all of that has to do with the organization of the system and the skill sets and the warehouse that happens behind the scenes.
Yeah. You know what interests me about this, I think probably the most, Santiago, is that when when people are first kind of making their way in this world and thinking about the promise of a pool of remote workers, one of the things that they think about immediately is this this crowd, this enormous set of resources that are potentially available to them. But then, particularly if they lack experience in doing it, then they start to run into often what they consider to be the challenges. Like, for example, how do I ensure quality? How do I make sure that the thing that I'm asking for is well understood and being delivered? Particularly if I'm dealing with people that are have lower familiarity with my needs and my organization, particularly if I'm dealing with people that are in different time zones. So I guess one of the questions that I have for you is what would be your main advice to customers in order to get the most out of services like yours?
I think it goes to one specific element, which is signals. I think the world actually goes around signals. We build signals to take decisions either on where we go to study,
Mhm.
which company we choose to work for, or in this case, which creators or people you're going to be uh, working with to augment whatever process you're augmenting in your company. And in that regard, a lot of companies have different ways of addressing it, but you can receive signals in terms of very straightforward things, like a rating of the professional, reviews of the professional, and then in that regard, you do the same in regards to ratings of the company, reviews of the company, and you can review. One of the things that I would do, depending on the complexity of the system that I'm looking to augment in this case, has to do with what is a vetting process that a company has to create a crowd of talent, and I would pay attention to the vetting process because depending on how the vetting process goes, even if it exists, there are companies a lot of marketplaces in this case that they don't have a vetting process, which is fine. They have other type of signals for that to for the system to work. But if you have a vetting process in place, it should give you some layer of confidence that there's a filter for the creators to join the crowd, and then you get additional system signals in the platform that should guide you on how to take a decision and who to work with.
Hmm. So you've got this large number of people, 15,000 or so people all around the world that are doing work for customers that themselves are all around the world. And then, of course, you've got your own internal organization that supports that. So I think what might be interesting for a lot of people is what have you learned, right? What have you learned from that from the group of 15,000 that influences how you organize Bunny Studios itself, the people that work for you on a day-to-day basis as full-time employees.
So we are about 90 people at Bonnie Studio running this platform, and then we are distributed in a lot of different places. There are a few people in the US. I'm actually taking this call from Colombia, from Bogota today, and then there's team members in Brazil, Argentina. There's someone in Egypt. There are a few people in Berlin, the Netherlands, Spain. Actually, someone from the team is in this call from Spain, and then there's someone in Singapore. So we're 90 people with a lot of cultural backgrounds,
Hmm.
a lot of different time zones, serving customers mainly in the United States with a
Hmm.
crowd of people that are all over the world. So there's a lot of combination that happen here. And potentially, as we go into more specific cases, the biggest abstraction that I've learned in terms of running a remote organization is that you need to define yourself as a remote first company, if that's what you're pursuing.
Hmm.
Because all of the systems that you build below that definition will be heavily impacted by understanding that you are remote. If you are trying to be remote friendly, it's different from saying I'm remote first. If
Hmm.
you are hybrid, it's different from saying I'm remote first, because then your objective setting, your planning, your performance, your promotions have a different layer of reading than saying you're hybrid. Management exists in Seattle and then we execute from somewhere else. That's already a definition on where hybrid management is in a hub and then the executor is in a different place.
Yeah.
So how you understand yourself will impact the systems that you build around your company.
Did you know from the outset that that's what you wanted to do, that you wanted to have an organization that was spread all over the world?
So that's an interesting question. When we started the company with my partner many years ago, he lives in the U.S. I live in California, and then we were hiring people here, a lot of people here in Colombia back in the day, 12 years ago almost, and we wanted to have first a hybrid approach. So we built a hub in San Francisco for about 7, 8 people, and then we built a hub in Colombia with about 25, 30 people very early on, or even less. I can't recall exactly, but we our first approach was to have a hub. And then we started having a lot of issues in the process, specifically the hybrid concept. Because it
Hmm.
was like, okay, so are we going to be building hubs? And then if I want to hire someone in a different country, should we build a hub for that person to be there? But there's no the concept of multiple people in that office because I just only hired one person. So we went from a hub version. A second version we ended up having was, or the progress went to a hybrid structure where we actually allowed people to run offices if they were in the same city or work from their home if they were not if they actually didn't want to go to a city to I'm sorry to an office space. So even if you were in the same city where there was a hub but you didn't want to be part of that hub, you could actually opt out and work from home. And the last version that we ended up doing before the pandemic arrived was like we were becoming a remote first organization that allowed people to actually collectively hire a WeWork, for example, if there were two
Hmm.
or three people, and if you wanted to go on a daily basis with another colleague in the same city to that WeWork, you could do it. Then the pandemic arrived, and then we eliminated that last concept of getting to a WeWork every once in a while that you wanted, and then we became fully remote, home office based in the last 4 years. So it's being a progress from a hybrid version to a fully remote with a lot of versions in between.
Yeah, so that's a fascinating evolution, and I think what I think will interest a lot of people will be the fact that a lot of that came before the pandemic. The vast majority of
Ah,
that came
yeah.
before the pandemic. So, what was driving the evolution? Was that you're just getting a deeper understanding of what it took to get out of your people? Was it your staff saying to you, "This is what I want"? What was leading you towards that path?
That you could find really good talent without outside the traditional hubs that you think
Yeah.
about. There's a lot of great talent that is there's a lot of great talent in New York and in Los Angeles, don't get me wrong,
Mhm.
but you can find a lot of good talent that is not in these two hubs, or you could get a lot of good developers that are not only in San Francisco, and you're limited by the concept that there has to be a proximity to the other individual to actually find these good people. And that's not the case. And not only I've met a lot of remote companies that are remote first companies in the US, the fact that we're a lot of I'm not an immigrant because I'm not living in the US, but where a
Mhm.
lot of nationalities
Yeah.
blending happening here at Bonnie Studio give us the opportunity of understanding, well, if I can hire a great designer that is working from Nigeria, can I find a great developer that actually works for the company from Nigeria? And if I can find a great copywriter that is working in I don't know Singapore, can that great copywriter be the copywriter of the product working in Singapore, which by the way is a real case. So in that regard, there's it came more from the abstraction that good talent it's everywhere, and it's a matter that a lot of companies don't know how to connect with that talent, and I get the complexities on the difficulties to do it, but if you could, why wouldn't you?
So then that leads me to the obvious and natural question, which is there is this talent everywhere, but it sounds like you've done a pretty good job of finding it. Is that related to the fact that you've got this group of 15,000 people as well? Is that a source for you, or what techniques are you using to find this great talent that is all around the world?
So I think it comes three things come to mind. One, there are full-time team members within the organization that are building Bunny Studio every day that have come through the crowd. So that
Mhm.
has been one proxy to find talent in the company. An additional element, it's traditional job boards. Like you're going to find Indeed working very well in a lot of countries. You're going to find LinkedIn working very well in a lot of countries. And then we go to simple job boards that are friendly into the markets that we know there's talent that we could potentially access. And then the third thing is, we're, if there's one thing in our recruitment process that we can be proud of, and there are a lot of things to highlight, we're good at vetting talent.
Yeah.
So one of the big challenges that a lot of companies have, for example, hiring engineers in Brazil or in Nigeria or in Southeast Asia, and they're scared about is, if I go and hire in these countries, how do I know they're good? And somehow the proximity, we're talking about signals earlier, oh, if it's in San Francisco, it's going to be good. So that signal removed the process to go into an additional process to your recruitment process. Uh, but if you can actually build good vetting system of skill sets and strengths that you're hiring, then is the same application for a Nigerian professional, from a Colombian, from a Brazilian, from an American. You just run the process, and if they have a good application, then they're good, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. That resonates with me a great deal. So, in our company, for example, 90+% of our design work and for our application and our coding is done out of Eastern Europe, and you start to see, like, when you first start doing it and you start to feel uncomfortable, you start to realize that there's a lot of cognitive bias going on here that actually isn't related to how good these people are, and it doesn't actually take
Yep.
long to start working with people on a day-to-day basis to start to realize that, there's this amazing talent all around the world, and if you do have a means of efficiently tapping into it, it actually puts you at a significant advantage than it would do otherwise.
Mhm.
But I that's one of the pieces of guidance I think I send out to people generally, which is like, try it. I mean, like try it with a couple of different employees, right? And see what you can do. And
Mhm.
once you start to put the mechanisms into place, they benefit you anyway. Because sure, yeah, a lot of people in San Francisco are good, but you can still hire somebody bad in San Francisco. And
It
so
happens everywhere.
yeah, and so what it will lead you to is an improvement in how you vet your employees, how you recruit in general, which will serve you beyond just the ability to be able to recruit these people from elsewhere. So
Mm.
love that you're doing that, and love that effectively you're living inside your organization many of the values that are provided by your organization, which is great. Um, so we talked about ostensibly your internal organization being this fully remote organization as well. I know that you've also experimented with some flexibility in terms of not just when people work, which is going to be natural because of the time zones you're in,
Mhm.
but also you've experimented with things like 4-day work weeks and other different kind of non-traditional working models when it comes to time. So I know you did a 4-day work week experiment. I think it's evolved a little bit. So why don't you talk us through that process?
I'll guide you through that, and please don't forget me to talk about We were discussing earlier about the role of management in these frameworks,
Yeah.
and you asked me about how does management lead in these examples, and I'll tell you about it in a minute, because there's always a contradiction in everything that we do
Mm.
here. But going back to 40 work weeks, so we were in a pandemic. I think a lot of us have a different way of living the pandemics. We are a company that we're a very unique company because again, our business is in the United States, but the number of employees that I have in the United States didn't allow us to access some of the benefits in terms of payroll that other companies were able to access. I have business in the European countries, but I don't have enough employees to actually go and have the benefits that European companies accessed. So we were running a business making sure that things didn't break in the process. This is March, April,
Hmm.
May, which was a lot of unknowns, uncertainties going around. And then we ended up doing something that was potentially, I remember it was my decision, like, hey guys, we're not going to be working 5 days, we're going to be working 6 days.
Mm.
So I need management to be focused on looking at every single number. Saturday, 8 a.m., are we going to be here until 1 p.m.? And then without noticing, like I think all of us said, yes, let's do it. We have to be extremely aware about what's happening in the market and make sure that we can react as fast as we can. And then we ended up burning ourselves very quickly.
Yeah.
From In about 3 to 5 months, we actually were burnt out. And it was not something that we were discussing, but then we were having a conversation with Micah Hockman, who leads our people operations team, and then she discussed not only the intensity that we were doing within the company, but the cognitive intensity of being isolated in your house, which is different from being remote.
Yes.
Like I can be in a remote setup and I can go grab a beer with my friend after this, but we were living in the setup that we were remote, completely isolated from any other external human interaction from our core family, right? Um, and then that added a lot of issues in our brains that again we all live in different ways in different parts of the countries, in different countries. And part of the proposal that Micah said, hey, let's cut a day. Let's not only remove that 6 days that we were doing for a few months, remove Friday. And
Mm.
there's always been the flexibility in the company of experimenting and including how the organization evolves as an experiment. And then we said, let's cut Fridays. And then we cut Fridays, expecting the output to be similar. And then we run a clean no Fridays policy. Depending on the teams, it would be a Monday or a Wednesday. If you have customer success or sales, you wanted them to be around through the week. But then we ran it for about 6 months, and it had a great impact.
Mm.
It was a fantastic effort. We did not see productivity or productivity, and actually output was not affected, but productivity did increase on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
Because when you think about it, we pride ourselves, right, in this remote computer technology scene. We pride ourselves of working 10, 12 hours, 15 hours in front of the computer, but a lot of that time is time that you're looking at the screen.
Yeah.
Like somehow your brain got into a procrastination that you cannot get out of, and then you're losing time. The first signal that we saw when we removed Fridays out of the schedule was, well, if I'm going to be doing this Monday, Thursday, I rather make sure to deliver what I have to deliver without that procrastination effort. And
Mm.
that was very positive to see how there's a lot of self-organization, and a lot of responsibility on every individual to say, what do I need to change in my own schedule to deliver what I was delivering Monday, Friday to deliver Monday, Thursday. And it's actually achievable. And the second element is a lot of people were looking, specifically parents, were looking to get Friday off to do life logistics that they were not able to do Monday, Friday before. There was like, I mean, if you have kids or if anyone that is listening have kids, living with kids during the pandemic with work, I think that's the most common discussed topic on the internet, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So giving Fridays off, oof, was an incredible benefit. And
Hmm.
then that built a lot of rapport between the organization and individuals during those first 6 months, even 9 months.
Hmm.
The second stage goes as follows, which is how do you get to the point that you measure the specific output of a project like a 4-day work week? And
Hmm.
that's where it becomes a little bit more gray. You get a lot of qualitative information and you get a lot of early signals that things are working out. Uh, but then we did push a bit in the midterm, like what happens, specifically, this was a rationale that I discussed with Mike and part of the reason of why we ended up in the version that we have today, which is what happens when you set up. So you got from working 5 days consistently, you organize your setups to be very productive for 4 days, but then you will get used to those 4 days
Hmm.
and you will get used to a pace that goes to those 4 days, and potentially some of the non-productive elements that you had before will come back to those 4 days.
Yeah. They kind of
So
creep back
somehow
in, don't they?
yeah,
Yeah.
and then the productivity, the output will not be the same of 5 days, but the one of 4 days. And then we also saw some friction in certain teams where we had a couple of teams that, out of the necessity of pushing to make sure that they merged certain deadlines, started to push consistently on a Friday. But then you had other teams that were like, I'm taking my Friday off. There's
Hmm.
nothing in the world that could happen in the company that I'm going to be replying an email or doing something on Friday. I'm being very, yeah, that's not a universal statement that happened here and there anecdotally again,
Hmm.
because again, it's very difficult to measure this completely quantitative. There's a lot of qualitative data in the process. And then out of that reflection and conversations with the team, we ended up in a model that we have today, and we've been running it for a couple of quarters, which is a push, play, learn day. And what we do is there's the fifth day of your week that you can organize in your quarter and in your year, where we have peaks of work in a specific month, and then we have also peaks that are coming down on work in a specific months for specific teams. So what we ended up organizing was, hey, these are signals of how our operation works through the year.
Hmm.
Take the signals and decide when in the year you should be pushing because there's a lot of work coming in, and where you can actually be stepping down and taking a day off here and there. And it not only gives you the autonomy to understand when to push and when to remove the foot out of the pedal, uh, but it also gives you the signals and the reminder that there are days there are weeks that when you invest 5 days, you're going to be very productive, but you have the luxury of taking only that 4 days, and you avoid, to some extent, you avoid having that repeatedness that it's always 4 days or it's always 5 days. You have certain management on that aspect.
So that all sounds very interesting and kind of intriguing, in a couple of different senses. So first off, I think you're a company that almost like was one of the earlier adopters of this 4-day
Mm,
work week. You got a lot of companies that are kind of looking at it, mainly based out of the US, but some companies here in the US that are looking at it as well. But you did it early, and now you've adjusted and adapted away from it, just at least just a little bit. That's interesting, just in terms of there's often a difference with any of these things. It's the like this is an example. Another example would be unlimited personal time off. All of these things, they have an immediate impact, and then there is a shift that happens over time as
mhm,
human behavior naturally changes over time. And we're even seeing that in remote and hybrid work setups as well. In general, like there's a difference between being a remote work company for 6 months and a remote company for 10 years, and there are different
correct.
subtleties and changes that happen inside organizations as those occur. The other thing I think is interesting as well, and I'm curious, it kind of reminds me of the unlimited personal time off example. There must be a lot of sort of unwritten cultural aspects to this, but then also unwritten cues that people take. So I'm not just talking about sort of like culture in the different countries. I'm talking about like
Hmm. In the
culture within the
organization.
company, right? Um, you're the CEO of the company, so you're ostensibly, the ultimate role model in the company, in the sense that people will look to what you do personally, and then obviously people will look to other managers inside your organization. So, what do you do personally to try to role model the right behaviors?
I never take time off. That's the big funny thing about all the conversation that happens. And that's constantly the same feedback that I get from, again, I have to point at Micah, who is like,
Yeah,
Santi, we're building all of this. And then you never take a freaking Friday off, or you never take a week off, or you're actually pushing those elements. So whatever we do, you actually go into something that is very specific that we also discuss internally, which is you're writing an unwritten rule that we have all of these documents, but the CEO doesn't follow them, therefore you shouldn't follow them as well.
yeah. Do
And
as I
there's always
say.
been a
Do
friction
do
in
as
that.
I say, not as I do, or vice versa.
Correct.
Yeah,
And I always try not to, like, whenever people are taking time off, I never step in, or if people are off for a Friday, I never step in. Uh, but I do get the mirror of, well, I have to push here and there. Some of the things that I do in that regard. There's a couple of things that said. One, I'm learning to be more conscious about my time off, and it's always a constant process.
hmm,
So I'm looking this year. We're actually organizing ourselves to have mandatory minimum days off. So we're not a fan of an unlimited policy, because there's always, that's not true really. Like, you cannot go
yeah,
on vacation for 2 years, so that's it, you broke it. But we're looking to make sure that we have 21 days off as a minimum requirement. And my calendar this year, for the first time, has 21 days off properly demarcated in April, late June, and there's something in October. So my first 21 days are organized onto taking that. I do take here and there Fridays afternoons off. It's hard for me for a lot of meetings not to be around a full day, but I do get off here and there on a Friday, and I do not reply to emails or anything until the next couple of days on the weekend. And what else am I doing? I think those are the two things. I think it's actually following the frameworks that we're putting together,
yeah.
where it's my own personal process.
Yeah, love the minimum time off one. We're seeing that, a couple of things that we've seen, which are sort of net new, which I think are really effective. So one is that, is minimum amount of time off. It's just a reflection of the fact that,
Mhm.
this thing in our skulls needs rest, right?
Yeah,
And so doing that forces you to be able to do that, and most likely leads to innovations and creativity and all that kind of stuff, that are
correct.
extremely important. And so recognition of that, of forcing some downtime, is very helpful. The other thing we've seen, which I think is kind of interesting, is new employees. So it's very common for people to jump from old job to new job without any decompression time between the two. Sometimes people are smart enough about it and they say, okay, I'm going to take a week off before I start. We are starting to see inside several organizations now the idea that you start with the company and literally your very first week is paid time that
Off.
you're not in the company, right? We start you with a vacation, and I think
That
I think
resonates
that's
a
a
lot.
really smart thing to do, because the moment that you're in, you're drinking from a fire hose, and so why not have somebody rested to be able to drink from that fire hose. So those
Yep.
sorts of ideas are really starting to take hold inside organizations, and I think for companies that are thinking about acting as remote or hybrid organization, oftentimes they think, well, hang on, we're giving people all this freedom already, just by making sure that they are, by allowing them not to come into the office, not to have a commute and all that kind of stuff. So why do we need to do these other things as well? And of course, what it's forgetting is the fact that work and the rest of your life merge, or tend to merge a great deal more when you are working remotely. So actually having time off is something that can be more important versus less important. So it's really cool to hear you doing that as an organization.
Very cool.
So let's as we finish up here, is just a couple of things that I'd love to go into. Um, and I think I think one is just delving a little bit more detail about what you said, that people were basically getting more done in less time, as they started to think about how to make a 4-day work week work for them.
Hmm.
In general, what do you think are lessons that people can learn from in terms of how you can go about reducing workloads without causing deadlines to slip?
I think it
Technology, for
has,
example, how can you use technology in order to be able to do that?
well, before we get into technology, I think it all starts with a framework of communication between the management and team members who are
Hmm.
executing. And that framework goes specifically into what is it important, the output on the number on the or the speed in which I reply to you in Slack. Do
Yes.
you want me to make sure that I get things done, or do you want me to reply to you in Slack? And if the matter is that we're focused on getting things done, then if you're building the right teams, everyone is capable of understanding pain points in their execution process. Like, we can lie as much as we want about saying, yes, I know, am I procrastinating for this or not this reason? But it is possible to do an abstraction on pinpointing and being self-aware of what are things that you have to do to improve as an individual. And when you have that agreement that, again, you don't have to reply on Slack on Friday, then good. I should take advantage of that, make sure to improve it, go Monday, Thursday, and I don't have to reply to Slack on Friday.
Hmm.
That works very well, and it starts in that agreement between management and team members. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Now, when you think about tools, I also think about agreements, because a lot of the tools that you do, either that's asynchronous communications, either
Hmm.
Slack, a Confluence, a Notion, whatever every company is doing, it all goes to agreement. You're going to be spending a lot of time reading a poorly written report.
Yeah.
And if we find agreements on how a good report is written, then you only have to read it once. And that's going to save me the fact that I have to reread it 3 days after I gave you the feedback. So I don't have to repeat the task. So when you think about it, when it comes to individual execution, we have a lot of control. Where the noise starts in organization is how the organization assembles themselves in exchange of information, in exchange of expectation. That's where the noise appears. And that's where I think a lot of companies, a lot of management should spend a lot of time. Why are you repeating 3 times the same document? Like, what happened on the first time that you wrote the document that is not properly communicating whatever the question was, so that the information flows in a proper way from the get-go, and not repeating it 2 or 3 times through 1 or 2 weeks, because that, if you've
Yeah.
listening, or you've been in the case, you repeat information 3 weeks, and you're just discussing the source of the information. Um, and then peer grouping. We do a lot of peer feedback reviews, but not only on us performance of individuals, but it's like sitting down a group of people and brainstorming about, hey, how did you get done a specific project, and building abstractions that are relevant to your own organization, that otherwise you wouldn't be able to learn. Because we do a lot about, we everyone, and I think we all go into the pitfall of, let's read what people are doing outside my organization to learn how they're actually doing it, but we invest less time actually looking inside the organization
Yeah.
to learn what people in my organization, in my particular universe of work, are actually doing well. So you get a lot of CEOs. I've been that CEO when I read a blog post about how people are being productive, and I tell Tim, this is how you have to be productive. And then I ask someone about how they're doing something, like, oh wow, that's actually smarter and better than what I read. So
Yeah.
investing the time and looking at how people are getting a lot of things on, and understanding who are your top performers and why, that's very important. I'll give you one quick example that we recently do at customer operations, so customer success. There's one outlier in terms of performance. He's fantastic. Um, he's a German guy living in Mexico, and then he always performs better on a weekly basis than anyone else. And then what we ended up doing this squad is like, hey, you know what? You're going to stop 50% of your execution, and you're going to spend 50% building and documenting how the hell you address your work, so that our others can mirror. And
Mm.
by doing it already 2 months into the quarter, we've seen improvements in some of the other under colleagues, by taking this individual as a mirror for others to understand how he was doing his job and why he was an outlier in the team. So when you think about it, it's go inside rather than, "Yeah, we can read a lot and everything has been written already."
Yeah.
Go inside and understand how to make it. That would be my thought process.
So I'll finish with a question that I think will be at the sort of in the heads of a few folks that have listened to this podcast regularly. We've talked a lot about the idea that the people that are doing your work can be anywhere, and
Mhm.
that great people exist anywhere, and you've got basically 15,000 of those people that are available largely on demand for people to use, as long as they understand the right questions to ask and how to frame what their requirements are. But I know inside a lot of people's heads right now, and particularly in this world of creative work, for example, is how do I get from um, having this need that a need and a requirement that I have to having that need being fulfilled by a combination now of people and AI type techniques. Because we hear a lot from people right now who are thinking about their organization and how their organization should be structured. They're seeing all these announcements around AI. They're seeing products launch in like no time that will create like an Instagram reel for you and immediately, or will create sets of tweets for you that will spread out for the next 6 months, and you take 30 minutes to create them, and they're not bad, right? So so as you're trying to figure that out as an organization, how do you go about doing that and understanding what is the right mix between people and artificial intelligence capabilities? How are you thinking about it even?
I'm actually, like, out of coincidence, I am thinking a lot about the concept of blending. So blending human capacity with AI power, and where can you build a process of creativity when you have input from a human creator, and then you have input from a robot.
Hmm.
And there are different aspects when you can do it. Uh, in the short term, like what will happen in 10 years, I'm not the right person to ask. I think we will know in 10 years what actually ended up happening with all of this revolution. The speed at which it's happening is very fast as for today, but they've been working on this for 6, 7, 8 years. So it's new that we're seeing it on the
Yeah.
market. But there's a lot of things that having people have been working on this for almost a decade or more. Um, so when that was going to the point that at least for the next 18 months and potentially 3 years, I see a lot of blending synergies, where a designer can work with their customer and they can actually use AI to communicate before the final piece is created. That's actually one of the use cases that we have with one of our customers, where they're creating an animation and they actually use one of these tools and said, guys, uh, I went into this tool, pitched how I wanted my characters to be. This is the output. Can we work around this output? So what he ended up doing was from someone that was not a designer to someone that is a designer. The AI was able to speed the communication element of it. So instead of verbally communicating what he wanted and the designer taking their input and actually going through a lot of drafts, he was able to reduce a couple of hours or days on work by taking the draft of AI, getting to the designer, and the designer was ready to work on the final output, taking that into consideration. You're going to be able to see a lot of. We're doing something at Bonnie Studio today, where we built a tool for post production. We do a lot of audio ads, and there are two types of audio ads that we get that we produce. One that requires a lot of sound effects, where there's a lot of immersion in the sound experience, and for that we work with people, a music producer, a sound producer. It's actually a really good person to do all of this. But there's a lot of audio ads today that just require a very straightforward blending of getting a soundtrack without any effects or anything. You can automate that part, so you get the production of the voiceover ready, and then you blend it with an automated piece, and then you speed up the production for the end buyer. You're going to be seeing those cases, and I think that's the approach that we're taking at Bonnie Studio today, blending it. I see that's what a lot of companies are going to be doing over the next 24 months, because still, when you go deep into the technology, it requires a lot of personal parameters or specific parameters to make something work very well.
Yeah.
So if you want, in the case of voiceovers, if you wanted to have 10 different accents in Brazil, because you're advertising in audio in Brazil in a lot of the regions that they market, you would have to build a very complex model for each individual accent that you're going to be creating. And then that parameterization can be very expensive versus just getting the voice actor and doing the specific accent. If you're looking for something very generic, and we say it on TikTok, right? Like the voiceover TikTok, I think we all have it on our ears already, and we're getting used to that voiceover. That's perfectly fine. Um, so we're going to be seeing a lot of blending, a lot of new use cases. I imagine TikTok with human powered by humans wouldn't be the same. Like the speed in
Mhm.
which you create a video would be very slow. So for some aspects, it will speed up and open new industries that didn't exist before. In some others, there will be a lot of blending, and that's my opinion over the next 18, 24 months, a lot of blending. What happens after that? We're still figuring out as we go. I think there are more questions than answers. Uh, so that's a little bit of here and there. It's not that organized, but that's a bit of what is on my head.
Perfect. And I think we'll leave it with that very human thing that is in your head. So Santiago, very nice to talk with you today. I really enjoyed it. I know our audience will too. Thank you.
Likewise, Paul, thank you so much for your time. To the audience, thank you for listening.